Thank you. Thank you so much, Dom, for starting the recording. Hello, everyone. My name is Timneet Kafella, and it's like Tim is neat. And I'm one of the co-organizers for the Black and Environment Week. And welcome to our panel titled We Are All Environmentalists, Exploring Different Shades of Green. And the purpose of this panel is we're essentially trying to highlight that environmentalism is a legacy that's rooted in the global Black community and how that has fostered positive change and advocated for healthy and inclusive futures. This discussion brings together a community of dynamic environmentalists ranging from scholars to community organizers to culminate and celebrate the descriptor of environmentalist and how that is encompassing. So join us and welcome as we explore what inspired these awesome environmentalists in their own right, about what inspired them to go into environmentalism, how they got there, and what it means to be a Black environmentalist. Before we really delve into the nitty-gritty of it all, Black and Environment would like to express our immense gratitude to the Environmental Defense Fund for their generous support and sponsorship of this panel. We would also like to thank Bivouac Incorporated and Arbor for generously sponsoring our giveaways. If you need some outdoor gear, check them out during this week. If you mention Black and Environment Week in store or put it in your online order comments, 20% of your purchase will go to supporting our week. So one thing too, as being part of this really awesome conversation, is that we welcome you to introduce yourself as the participants in the chat and ask questions for the panelists, as we'll be having a Q&A session shortly after. So now I get to have the immense privilege of telling you all about our awesome panelists, reading their awesome biographies and all the great work that they do. And I'll begin with talking about Fred Tutman. Fred Tutman is the founding Patuxent Riverkeeper who serves as a community watershed advocate for Maryland's longest and deepest intrastate waterway. Fred's family has farmed and fished along the banks of Maryland's Patuxent River since the 1700s. His organization has worked on a wide range of issues and watershed problems in the 8-year history. Patuxent Riverkeeper strives to reconnect people and communities to the river while championing the environmental needs of underserved and disengaged communities. Fred also happens to be the only African-American waterkeeper in the nation and a former board member of Waterkeeper Alliance, which is the licensing body for all waterkeepers internationally. When not watchdogging his river, Fred teaches an adjunct course in environmental law and policy at St. Mary's College of Maryland. In his spare time, he performs trail maintenance on the Appalachian Trail and explores the Patuxent River watershed on foot and by kayak. Welcome, Fred.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So happy to have you here. Next up, we have Rachel Scarlett. Rachel is an ecologist, social justice scholar, mentor, and teacher. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a Master of Science in Ecological Sciences and Engineering at Purdue University. She is currently a PhD candidate in the Ecological Sciences and Engineering Interdisciplinary Program at Purdue and a 2020 Ford Foundation Dissertation Fellow. As an interdisciplinary scholar, she strives to think beyond disciplinary silos. She considers human communities and Earth ecosystems to be intricately entangled and codependent on each other. Rachel is from Los Angeles, California, and enjoys birding, gardening, and playing basketball in her spare time. Since moving to the Midwest, she has been an active member of the Younger Women's Task Force of Greater Lafayette and a high school mentor in the Heads Up Teen Mentoring Program. Rachel has accepted a postdoctoral position as a David H. Smith Conservation Research Fellow. She'll be researching social equity and water conservation practices at the Field Museum in Chicago. Welcome, Rachel, and congratulations. Next up, we have Imari Walker. Imari is a PhD candidate at Duke University, investigating the fate, occurrence, and transformation of plastic additives within freshwater environments. In particular, her dissertation work focuses on endocrine disrupting chemicals like bisphenol A, or as we know it as BPA, that are a concern to human health and the environment. Before Duke, Imari earned her Bachelor's of Science degree in Marine Science at the University of California, Berkeley. She's also the founder of the Microplastics Collaboratory and Journal Club at Duke University, and is an award-winning science communicator, culminated by the Society of Environmental Chemistry and Toxicology Student Science Communication Competition. Alongside her PhD work, Imari uses her science communication-based YouTube channel to share information about plastic pollution, microplastics, and chemicals associated with these consumer products. She also posts content assisting students with navigating the graduate school application process and highlighting aspects of being an environmental engineer. Welcome, Imari. And next up we have, hi. Next up we have Derick Lugo. Derick had never hiked, camped, or pitched a tent a day in his life. This Brooklyn-born New York City urbanite hopped a train to Georgia, grabbed a taxi at the station, and told the cab driver to drop him off at the beginning of the Appalachian Trail. Then he did as he has always done, put one foot in front of the other and never looked back. After hiking for more than 2,000 miles, he now feels invincible and plans to cross the Sahara barefoot. Not really, but when an ambitious spirit is successful, it will strive for even greater accomplishments. Storytelling is Derick's life mission. He's an author, professional speaker, and adventurer. The Unlikely Thru-Hiker is his debut memoir. Find him online at Derick Lugo, both on Instagram and Facebook, and at his website, www.dericklugo.com. Welcome, Derick. And last but certainly not least, Jeremy Orr. Jeremy is a senior attorney for the Natural Resources Defense Council based in Detroit, Michigan, where he focuses on drinking water and source water protection issues and works to ensure that everyone has access to safe, sufficient, and affordable drinking water. With a background in grassroots community organizing and public interest law, Orr most recently served as the National State Program Director for the People's Climate Movement and as an Environmental Justice Coordinator for the Transnational Environmental Law Clinic. He's on the Michigan Environmental Council Board, the Environmental and Climate Justice Chair of Michigan National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a member of the United States Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and Vice Chair of the Environmental Justice Committee of the American Bar Association. Orr holds a bachelor's, master's, and a law degree from Michigan State University. Welcome, Jeremy. Awesome. So thank you all for your willingness to be in community with us as we explore how we all are environmentalists in our own ways and celebrate and uplift the ways we can all engage with our environment in the future. For everyone who's attending, remember, if you have a question for the panelists, you can drop that in the chat as we have a Q&A portion that's going to follow this conversation. So let's get started. Throughout this week, on our social media platforms and conversations, we have posed this question to the greater Black and environment community, and now I'm excited to pose it to you all. The first question that I have for you all is, what does being an environmentalist mean to you? Derick, would you like to go first?
Yes, thanks for having me. There's a bunch of answers for that question. If you would ask me that a year ago, a few years ago, it would have been different. But now in my life since I've been sharing my story from through hiking the Appalachian Trail to writing the book and now speaking about it, falling in love with the trail, I would say being aware of your environment, whether it's in where I am right now in Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by mountains, or in New York City, where the mountains aren't that close, but if you look for it, it's there. It may be 50 miles away, but it's there. So being aware of your environment, exploring it, discovering what you can, and coming back, turning around, coming back and sharing it with others. For me, that's my mission, and that's where I'm at with that question.
Awesome, and that's a beautiful way to define what an environmentalist is. Thank you so much, Derick. Rachel, how do you define an environmentalist?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've thought about this question a lot, and I think first about who was the first environmentalist in my life, like who was my role model, and I think about my mother, and she was just, I don't think she would call herself an environmentalist, but growing up in Los Angeles, she would always take me to the beach. And she would always take me to like outdoors locations so that I can appreciate nature. And on the beach, she would always show me, she would always point out like the dolphins that were like coming in and out of the water on the Pacific Ocean. And I just really appreciate that about her. And I think that's where environmentalism starts. It starts with curiosity about the environment. It starts with sharing that curiosity with others, similar to Derick's answer. And I'm just so appreciative of my mom for actually like making that an important part of my life. So I think it starts small. It's about sharing your appreciation for the environment, caring about the environment. And then as you advance, it's getting into community with other people. It's becoming an activist and protecting the environment.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes we don't have traditional definitions of an environmentalist, but we do environmental work. Thank you so much for highlighting that is definitely something that's omnipresent in our lives. Jeremy, how do you define an environmentalist?
I'd say for me, one part of that is kind of balancing the tension of being and existing in a space that, as defined now, right, kind of mainstream environmentalism, like wasn't necessarily created, right, for me to exist and have like a key role in. So that's one thing I think about. And then I think the other thing too is my own lived experience, right, was the opposite. Like I grew up in Detroit, right? Like I didn't grow up around green space. I didn't grow up around water. I didn't grow up around nature. So my exposure to the environment didn't come until after I graduated from college, right? When I was in my 20s. And even then, that first experience around environment and environmental issues was like an environmental justice issue in particular. So I think for me, like the lens that I come to environmentalism with is a lens of kind of protecting the environment and resources for the sake of promoting, health and well-being of people, right? So I think I define it as more about, public health and well-being of human health as it relates to our kind of natural and built environment.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredibly powerful. Imari, how do you define being an environmentalist?
Yeah, I think I kind of look at it a little different because of, my major is environmental engineering, and what we focus on is air quality, water quality, waste management. And so I think I perceive that from like a different lens, especially from chemistry and exposure for our environment or our human health, being exposed to harmful chemicals. I think about, for being an environmentalist, it can be more than just the outdoor environment, but also your indoor environment and, what we're exposed to, or what ends up flowing out of our indoor environment into, our waste streams, and having to deal with that, now or in the future for, 10, 20, hundreds of years from now. I think that environmentalism in general is really about being mindful, thinking about what intent you have with the resources that you have available to you, whether that is your voice, your thoughts, what you can spend or what you can't spend, even just your own energy and time you put into things that can create a better world for yourself, for your community, and for the future. I think a lot also about climate change, because I think that's something that, doesn't always flow, as easily with that. But those are a few of my thoughts for environmentalism.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Imari. That was incredibly powerful. Fred, how do you define environmentalism?
So I've learned that I am decidedly an environmental activist, because I'm not sure that all environmentalists are truly activists. I was raised in the boondocks. Unlike Jeremy, I was actually raised in the country and raised overseas in Sierra Leone, where some of my formative experiences involved riding on rivers and having an understanding in Sierra Leone in particular how these rivers were like highways that really connected the culture and really connected to people spiritually in various ways. So coming back to the States, I'm a Maryland guy named after a famous Marylander named Frederick Douglass. And I found as a late life law school experience that I was much more interested in activism than I was in just enjoying nature. As much as I like testing myself in nature and walking the AT and doing various things that bring us closer to a soulful connection to nature, the business of protecting communities and helping people stand up and exercise their own voice, their own sense of self-determinism in the environment, I think is extraordinary work. And much more interesting to me than just pure, kind of nature pursuits, because it really gets into the underlying issues and problems within the society itself. Because frankly, the environmental community is probably the whitest place I've ever encountered. I've never been more conscious of being Black than when I became a Riverkeeper, to be honest with you. So that's what I think. I think being an environmentalist means having a soulful connection to nature, connecting ourselves and our sense of spirit to these resources that are extraordinary and have so much to show us. And there's an actualization process that's a part of being an environmental activist. You find more of who you are, and being a Riverkeeper will really show you who you are. It'll show you what you're made of, because it'll test you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer. A general theme that I'm hearing is the capability to advocate and advocate for an environmental future and an environmental present that is healthy and has all of us in it, Black people in it, celebrates Black people, uplifts Black people, and ensures that we're not just merely surviving, but thriving. And thank you so much for those really powerful answers. The next question that I have for you all is, what is a day in the life of your environmental work? I muted myself, my apologies. What does a day in the life of your environmental work look like? Because you all do different work on different things. And so I think it would be really helpful for folks to understand like how you can engage in this type of work from different perspectives. Let's start with Rachel.
Oh, okay, great. My work is probably the most boring. So I work mostly on the computer. So in my dissertation work, I focus on collecting big data sets. So either surveys about environmentalism and who participates in environmentalism. So that's like my social science hat. But I'm also an ecologist by training. So I also collect big data sets of water quality, data sets of ecological data sets, what organisms are living in the streams. And I say I collect these, like I don't do field work to collect these data sets. I use other people's data. So that's why I say my day-to-day is like on the computer, analyzing these data sets, writing code in R, a programming language, to try to find trends in these data sets. And I think about questions like, how does urbanization influence water quality? How does urbanization influence stream organisms? I study rivers and streams. And I also think about, on the social side, questions like, who participates in stream management and water management at the city level? How does your race, your gender, your class, your sexuality, any parts of your identity influence if and how you participate in water management? So I do all of those things, ask all of those questions, but mostly I work behind a computer. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. But you do all of these great things behind a computer towards bettering our environment, right? Bettering our environmental futures, and that is incredibly powerful. Next up, I would like to ask Fred, what does a day in the life of your environmental work look like?
Well, that's one of the things I love about the work, is it's never the same twice. I spend a lot of time in court, in administrative hearings. We challenge zoning issues, but mostly we work closely with communities so that they own the outcomes of the work. So in effect, we respond to community requests for assistance. We're particularly attentive to calls that come from overburdened communities. We think it's important that these communities own the outcomes. And so we're very much about planting seeds that will be regenerative in these communities so that the work is durable, that it can't just disappear if it becomes unfunded. Other times I'm on the river itself, investigating various cases that we have, pollution problems, reading legal briefs or reports or studies. This weekend, I'm training a bunch of Boy Scouts to do local water testing on the river. It's a three-ring circus, to be honest with you. It's a little bit of something every day. It is literally the most challenging work. that I've done in a very, very busy career. This is the busiest and the hardest work, the most challenging work I've ever done. There's 3 lifetimes of work to be done on this river, easy, maybe more.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, it really sounds dynamic and time consuming, but dynamic and very fulfilling as well. Thank you so much for sharing that. Derick, what does a day in the life of your environmental work look like?
I gotta say, I love my job. I love what I'm doing right now. I wrote a book. My book came out 2 years ago called The Unlikely Thru-Hiker. And it came out in 2019. So for 2 years, I was planning to have a book tour. Last year was going to be the big book tour, but obviously COVID happened. So it ended up being a virtual book tour. But for me, even before that, I was always doing talks and sharing my experience, because I did this amazing adventure, this thru-hike, 2,200 miles of the Appalachian Trail, living in the woods for 6 months. And I walked into it not even knowing if I liked hiking. I didn't know how to pitch a tent, how to do any of those things. But when I started, the outdoor community, they all like showed me a lot of love, everything I needed to learn, that I should have learned months, years before that, I learned on my first day. And then halfway through my thru-hike, I decided I was going to write about it. And I fell in love with it. So after the book came out, or before the book came out, I was just doing talks, just sharing my love for it. And all these organizations saw that I had a voice for it. And I wasn't your average thru-hiker. I stuck out like a sore thumb, and we can talk about that later. But while I was out there doing these talks, people saw that I had a voice and they say, hey, you know, this dude also wrote a manuscript and he has a story to share. So that's how I was able to publish my book. But right now, this past week, I did 10 talks for middle school and high school students. And yesterday I drove 2 miles to the western part of North Carolina to do 2 talks, my first in-person talks in like a year and a half. And I loved it. High school students, it's hard to read them. And that's how I feed off the audience. But the middle school kids, they didn't know what was happening. In fact, when they came up to me at the end, they were like, we apologize. We thought you were going to be boring. We don't know. But when we were done, when I was done doing my talk, the kids, I can see that the kids were enjoying themselves. They went from not knowing what was going on. And what I like to do is, when I first do my talk, I want to get to know who I'm talking to. So I'll ask them to stand up, and I'll ask them if they know about the Appalachian Trail, or if they've hiked or camped out or anything like that. And if they haven't, I'll say, you know, if you have, continue standing. And then little by little, they all start sitting down. Then I tell my story, how I knew nothing about it. And they're like, oh, wow. So they went from like most of them not knowing a lot about the outdoors to now being really curious. And then the Q&A, all these questions come out. So that's what I do. I just share my story. And while sharing my story, I'm also teaching these kids and people that have never done anything like that, or even thought of going up to the outdoors. Because it's not about doing 2,200 miles. It's about, you can tell me that you did 3 miles. People send me messages saying, hey, I just, you did the entire Appalachian Trail and I only did, 3 miles. I just did 3 miles. I'm like, get rid of the just in that conversation and in that statement, because just going out there is what matters. And if you're doing that because you read my book or you hear me doing my talks, then I'm doing something right. So that's my job, to like share my passion, share my story, and continue writing about the outdoors, and hopefully inspiring others to actually, and not just go in the outdoors, but doing something out of the ordinary, stepping out of their comfort zone, which I did. So that's my job, and I'm digging it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Derick. That's the immersion of using your narrative to immerse people in nature and make them really inspired by that. That is truly powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Imari, what does a day in your environmental work look like?
Yeah, so what I do really is work on my PhD. So I'm working to understand how plastic pollution affects our environment. What chemicals are present in these products that honestly are not disclosed to the public, and really trying to identify what they are and how they're changing, if they can become more toxic or less as they're changing with exposure to light or air or temperature. So a lot of the things that I do are actually on a laboratory benchtop, sometimes outside in the field where we're exposing really large boxes of microenvironments to microplastics and studying them for a year, to just exposing plastic to water for a couple days and taking samples and analyzing them using analytical chemistry. So those are the main things that I'm doing, is just analysis and a lot of computer work also, like Rachel. But, it's, past the PhD, I have a, large passion for informing people on plastic pollution, on sustainability. So my work goes past the PhD itself to talking to people about what are microplastics, what are these chemicals, how can we reduce our plastic consumption, or how can we put more pressure on, changing policy, or changing the way that, corporations package their products, or, anything that they can do that can make a difference in the way that we are currently interacting with the materials that surround us. So that's usually through my YouTube channel, also through speaking engagements, and even, working on talks with global trees for plastics. So I think that the advocacy part is also something that I really enjoy and of talking about and being a part of. And so that's a part of the day in the life for my environmental journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Imari. We all know, if you all don't know, she is Microplastic Bay, and does some really cool work on science communication and does some really great science. And it's great to learn that you're leveraging your research questions, essentially to ensure that you're informing everybody else. You're leveraging your research questions, doing the work, and making it accessible to the public too, which is incredibly important. And it's great. That's environmental work in itself as well. Thank you so much. Jeremy, what does a day in your environmental work look like?
So it kind of unfolds in three different ways on any given day, at my current job. Similar to, kind of what Fred mentioned, I come from a background of kind of activism and advocacy. So that's that's the lens I bring to my work. That's how I carry out my work. So, one part of that daily work is actually engaging impacted residents, right, on whatever issue I'm working on in those communities, right, whether it be in Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, LA, wherever, right? I'm constantly in relationship and communication with, partners and impacted residents or clients, if it's a case who should be centered in the midst of the work that I do on a daily basis. So it's partner engagement is one part of that. I think the second part of that, is the kind of the advocacy piece, the actual direct legislative or policy or legal advocacy that's taken place within my work. For the last, couple of months, I've been working on a bill that's getting pushed through a state legislature, and literally my entire days have mostly been negotiations with other stakeholders, with corporate stakeholders, utility stakeholders, other community stakeholders to make sure that we can get this bill to a place where it can get passed, right, and in the protection of community members. So that tends to play out a lot of my work too. And then the last piece of that is the legal side, the actual legal advocacy. When we get to this point of litigation, I work at an organization where we have a litigation team, but folks like myself who are doing the work, we typically, if we're going to pursue a lawsuit, we join that litigation team for this particular lawsuit and support, particularly with drafting or writing the briefs and reviewing for technical expertise and stuff like that. So a good chunk of time is also spent on actual litigation and holding polluters accountable. Thankfully, mostly these days you don't have to get up and go to court too much anymore. At least where I'm at, you're still remote, right? You're still kind of zooming in for even court cases and stuff like that. So, but yeah, that's my day looks like one of those three things for the most part, or some combination of those most of the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it definitely seems like you wear a lot of hats each day. But, essentially you are ensuring that we are all having healthy physical environments, and we really appreciate your efforts and labor on that. Thank you so much. Jeremy. So this question is specifically for Derick. You embarked on an amazing journey hiking the Appalachian Trail on a whim, and undoubtedly a journey that physically immersed you in nature. What was it that inspired you to do so? And what did you love about it the most?
Well, I'm a huge reader. And years ago, someone handed, this must have been like 15 years ago. Someone handed me a book, said, hey, read this. And it was Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods. And prior to that, I had never heard of the Appalachian Trail. I didn't know much about hiking, camp. I didn't know anything about camping. It was something that I didn't do. My family, my friends, we didn't do that. When I read the book, they handed it to me, say, hey, it's hilarious. You're gonna love it. I loved it. It was hilarious. But the one thing that really stuck out was this long trail that this author made sound so hard and challenging. And I thought to myself, well, I want to do that one of these days. But it was one of those pipe dreams, like wanting to travel around the world or run a marathon or hike the Appalachian Trail. But luckily, I had the time, the opportunity to actually, and I saved enough money to actually do it. But I had not saved money thinking that I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. I just happened to have the time. So once I realized I was going to do that, started sharing it with my family and friends, and they were like, no, dude, you shouldn't do that. But once I jumped into it, and also I jumped into it just because it was a challenge, not because I thought I was going to love the outdoors. I didn't even know if I was going to like the outdoors. Luckily, I did fall in love with it, but to me, it was the challenge of going from Georgia to Maine. It was just a challenge. But within a few weeks, I fell in love with it. And the one thing that really stuck out for me was the community. And I think it was the year I did it, I was the only person of color that did it. And that was brought to my attention. And it wasn't like, hey, you're Black. What are you doing on the trail? No, it wasn't like that. It was like, hey, man, we're glad you're out here. Thank you for being out there. And I'm like, well, I'm glad you're out here, like not understanding what was going on. But they would say it. They would voice it because they just wanted me to know, and they wanted more people of color out on the trail. And that was my experience on the Appalachian Trail, was that people were welcoming, and they embraced me, and they wanted more people like me on the trail, which was really weird for me because I'm from New York City, the melting pot of the world. I have friends from all over the place and now all over the world because of my Thru-Hike and my talks and all that. But I would say that's what inspired me, and the love of the community and how they embraced me was the biggest thing that came out. I came out of this adventure using the word love a lot more. I hang out with my friends, and when we were able to hang out with friends, and when we were done hanging out, I would say, I love you. Just love, they're like, love you too, because of the generosity on the trail. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, man. We don't, I'm a little, if someone comes up to you and they trying to like be friendly, but you give you something like, where's my wallet? I'm like, what's up with that? But it was a totally different animal. And I stepped out of that. I finished my Thru-Hike, having a different perspective on human nature. And I took that and ran with it. So yeah, did I answer the question, or did I drift off?
No, you did. Thank you so much for sharing
You're
that.
welcome.
Yeah, it's truly important. And to kind of follow up on that, actually, Fred brings up a really great question, which I'm going to pose to you all. It was one of the questions that we had, which is how do you feel as being Black people in these spaces, these environmental spaces that you're in specifically? Fred, would you like to start?
Yeah, I really think that these movements don't have people of color in perspective. I think they see people of color as utilitarian, as a means towards their end, often enough, not always, but for the most part. And that's really problematic. To call me diversity is a shortchanging of my true potential in these organizations, and I resent it deeply, and have been very careful about whom we partner with and whom we work with to protect not only the work that we do from expropriation, but the communities we serve, because there's a sense of what I call a difference between turf and domain. in whiter greens, right? Turf is where you're standing and where you're entitled to be and where you know your way around. Domain is where you can go. And those are not the same thing if you're white or you're black. Where we can go safely tends to be very, very different. There are very few places people of color can go and start bossing people around with respect to their environment. Yet, I know plenty of whiter folks who do that all the time. So we really do have to reclaim our voice in these movements because they don't speak for us most of the time. They don't know us enough to speak for us, and they're stuck with this paradigm that they need to be diverse. And so they're running around like mad trying to extinguish this image of racism, when in truth, the problem's bigger than that. Actually, it's not just extinguishing the illusion of racism, it's how do you incorporate these voices in a way that they mean something, that they actually have a role to play in these organizations that's not subservient and an afterthought. And so I do think we have to pony up and confront that as people of color. When we start our own movements, we don't get funded, okay? If we're gonna be in these movements, we need a little more cheese to participate. We've been boycotting for a long time. That's my take on it. They think it's because we don't know about the environment and so we don't come to the meeting. The truth is, we're boycotting. We know where we matter and where we don't. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That really does bring to mind a lot of the time. I like your sentiment on the fact that we're boycotting these movements and creating our own, because a lot of the time in these conversations, I'm sure we've all heard this being in the environmental space. I know I've heard this myself, being told that Black people don't care about the environment. And it's such a common thing to hear. When essentially it just means that, you know, you don't recognize that you haven't designed this space to be inclusive for everybody. So therefore, we'd rather exit stage left. And anyone else want to talk to that particular question? Would you like to share about how you feel being a Black person in your respective environmental space?
I can just add a short tidbit to that. Just even from the story of us meeting each other, me and Timnit, we ended up finding each other online because we were one of, you know, the rare few Black people studying microplastics in this sphere. I've gone to so many conferences trying to find other researchers that look like me that do this kind of work. And it was just, you know, luck of the draw that we ended up finding each other online and forging that connection and community for ourselves so we can continue to give each other resources and information and knowledge to be powerful in our own space. So I think that it's definitely difficult to find people and find the right representation, but you know, when you find it, you hold on to it and you provide community and space for it, because it allows for us all to grow and flourish. But you know, I think the other big question that we're missing is, you know, what does it take to build up and include more people in this community and make it more accessible and available to us all? And I say that's, you know, making our voice known, us, you know, heard, showing people that this is a space for them. And that can be even through social media tools, utilizing Black Twitter, you know, showing people that we can be out here, we can be doing different aspects of what it means to be an environmentalist. You don't have to be outside all the time to claim that you're an environmentalist. You don't have to be, you know, doing field work. You can, you know, claim your own space within this and in your own ways of advocacy and sustainability. So that's just my piece on it and trying to get people excited and involved as much as possible.
Thank you for sharing that, Imari. 100% agree. And I'm so thankful for Twitter because that's how I got to meet you. And it's insane that we're all kind of, to talk to the way Rachel refers to it, siloed. We have these awesome platforms that are allowing us to create connections, such as this wonderful week too. Rachel, actually. Rachel, would you mind talking about how you feel being Black in this space, in your environmental space?
Yes, I feel very isolated at times, and especially doing my PhD work. Sometimes I question if my research questions are good questions, and I can say from experience with Dr. Fuchsia Hoover, who's organizing this space or helping to organize. I was working with her on a research proposal. She was helping me with it. And I was asking questions about some work in Chicago. I was asking questions about, do Black people have different ideas about how they should participate in environmentalism based off of their environmental experiences. So Black people have tremendously different experiences with the environment, especially in urban areas, to me, from my experiences, than white people do. But then I was telling Fuchsia this, and I was just like, you know, is it just me? Is it just my experiences? Is this not like a real thing? Is this a bad research question? Am I making assumptions based off of lack of knowledge? And then Fuchsia came in and she said, you know, your experiences matter, and your experiences are valuable to this research, and your experiences make your research unique. So I think I definitely needed to hear that. And that's why we need community in these spaces. We need to have other people around us to, I guess, ensure us that we're on the right track. And I'm not the only one thinking about these types of research questions. So yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, Derick?
So I've been doing this for a long time, since 2012, talking about the outdoors, about my adventure. And in the beginning, I did feel like I was a unicorn that I was just showing off, like all these big outdoor organizations were like, look what we found. And they're like showing me off. Now, the thing with that was there wasn't a lot of, now you have a lot of beautiful Black organizations that are talking about the outdoors. 9 years ago, not so much. There was one or two, but not so many. So I took that opportunity where, okay, there's these huge outdoor organizations that want to showcase me. Obviously, you know, they may be using me because, again, look at this, look what we captured, you know, but I took that opportunity to voice, to start building a platform, because I couldn't write a book and then no one knows, like, why would you buy a book from this guy? You know, it's his first book. I felt the need to have that voice, and it took years, but after a while, people were like, yo, this dude has something to say. So I took that situation and made it into a really positive one. Now I have a great relationship with two of the biggest organizations here in the East Coast, outdoor organizations. And they're a white organization, but, and I know the whole word diversifying and all that. And I couldn't understand. A lot of times they would come up to me and ask me these questions. Like, I speak for the entire Black community. I don't know all the answers, but I can tell you what I felt the need to do. I felt the need to share my story. So then a little Derick that saw the cover of my book, like, look, this dude looks like me. This dude does not look like your typical hiker, can go, oh, okay. And also it's kid friendly. So there's no curses or anything like that. I make up some words that sound almost like curses, but I want to make sure, I didn't want it to be a book that parents couldn't read to their kids, you know? So for me, going out there, doing the talks 2 years ago, real quick, I did a talk in Bend, Oregon, and it was a outdoor hiker, it was a workshop, and it was 300 people, and it was a bunch of different presentations, and I was the key spokesman. I was the last person to speak. And 300 people, I was the only Black person there. So I'm standing, doing my presentation. No one knows who I am. In all these presentations, they're talking about the environment. They're really, really informative. But my presentations are a lot more, they're lighter and humorous. And I'm telling stories, but people are also learning about me and about this. I'm on the West Coast, so people don't know a lot about the Appalachian Trail. So I go there, and then at the end of my talk, I'm looking out, I see no one, and someone asked me about the Black community and why there isn't a lot of Black people on the trail. And again, I don't have all the answers, but I give them my reasons. But then I say, hey, I'm hoping in a few years that I won't be the only Black person. I can look out and see a few more Black people, if not half of you guys being Black. That's what I want. That's why I'm out here doing these talks. So in the beginning, it was very like, okay, I'm going to hold on to this and write it. And then eventually I'm going to settle and figure out how I can be this voice and make it into something positive. So I took something that probably may have not been positive, but took it and made it into what it is now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredibly powerful. And yeah, it's past just having like more, just being like, oh yeah, we have a Black face to just like represent all of these voices. We're often like reduced to being one-dimensional individuals when, you know, we are multidimensional and we expect that of every other community. Why can't that be expected of us, right? Thank you so much for sharing that,
I have
Derick.
to point out
Jeremy?
that a
Yeah.
white environmentalist once said to me, we let you in this movement and now you want to go and change everything. I thought that was very interesting. Like, oh, thank you, Massa. I'm telling you, this is claimed space. And that takes some craft to change that paradigm, because there is the belief that this is claimed space. That's huge, huge.
Yeah. You bring up an excellent point that, you know, environmentalism historically has, well, the way it's presently designed is that it is colonial in nature, and very much ensures that it is not designed for people like us to thrive in it. So you bring up an excellent point, Fred. Thank you so much.
And
for
the science actually provides the basis for that sometimes by arguing that they don't really have to be polite and deal with the local establishment and meet the mayor. We've got good science behind this. Science is a form of imperialism when used in that context, right? It doesn't expand the exposition. It tries to defeat opposition by using science as the basis. So these folks who rely on the science, I'm not a science denier, but I know there's a lot more than science in these communities that bears on the decision-making, the politics, the history, the culture, all of that stuff, right? We look at these problems holistically, yet there's a current out there that believes that science is the only basis we need, right? I've had people also say to me, in the context of pollution trading in the Chesapeake Bay, who cares if it's unjust, if it's good for the environment? I've had people say that to me. So I'm telling you, these are tone-deaf movements because they've never had to confront the idea of justice as an organizing theme. That's huge in terms of the different channel that they're on.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much for sharing that, Fred. Absolutely. Jeremy, would you like to touch upon being Black in this environmental space?
Yeah, you know, I'll share briefly. In particular, you know, even like when I think about, we do like Earth Day's coming up, Earth Day's tomorrow, right? And I think about, you know, the foundations of Earth Day, right? Like, you know, I did an op-ed on it a few years ago, and Earth Day was founded by wealthy beachfront kind of white community in Santa Barbara after a huge oil spill, right? That's what triggered Earth Day in 1970. So I think we're on, you know, celebrated 50 years last year. 1970, it was April 1970. That's what triggered it. Never mind that there were all of these oil spills in the Gulf where Black, brown, and indigenous communities throughout the 40s and 50s, right, that were just as tragic, but there was no trigger, right? And so you have this huge oil spill in 1970, which triggers wealthier white communities to start this kind of more, you know, stronger, more national environmental movement, which then literally months later resulted in the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, right? We're talking maybe later that year, December of 1970. Right, so when I began to connect those dots of who kind of, you know, drove that movement and what it was rooted in, right, I kind of, you know, connect the dots to all of these different points in history and how they were exclusive of Black people and Black communities. And even when I think about, you know, the work that I do now, I'm at one of the largest, you know, environmental organizations in the world, right? We're international. We have, you know, over 700 employees throughout the world. We have 70 Black employees, maybe a little less, you know, and we were founded on litigation, right? That's what we do. We do law and policy. Up until recently, I was one of 2 attorneys, Black attorneys in the entire organization internationally, and one just left, right? So now that puts me as the lone Black attorney of a 700-person, you know, organization who's come a long way, right? Mind you, but yet still, you know, we're at that point. And, you know, one of the things I've been able to do at, you know, my current job is work with, you know, other Black employees to organize, you know, kind of internal efforts to hold our institution accountable for not only, you know, how we interact in the world externally, but how we make this a place that's welcoming to Black people internally, a place they want to be, a place they want to stay, and a place they actually can stay. And so we created an organization within the organization called Black Environmentalists Seeking Transformation, BEST, right? We're called the BEST at an RDC. And we've been working for coming up on a year now on maybe 8 or 9 different propositions to the institution, more so demands on what they need to do to get it together to make this an accommodating place for Black people, and not just accommodating, but a welcoming place for Black people where we can be, you know, long term. And I think that's part of it, right? Making sure that when we're in these positions and in these spaces, we're speaking up, we're speaking out, we're doing what we can to make, you know, to make that change and welcome more people in. Yeah, it's definitely tough, but it wasn't unexpected either, right? Getting into this work, you know, as was mentioned by many of you, knowing, you know, the field is overwhelmingly white, in particular for me, right? Being in the environmental field and being an attorney, which is also overwhelmingly white, right? You combine both of those, man, it's nothing but white folks outside of the communities I work with, right? All of my colleagues are predominantly Black, so.
Absolutely. And you bring up an excellent point too about, which you briefly touched upon, about inclusivity rather than just recruitment. This idea that you just have Black people in the space and you're like, okay, you're here. That's that. Don't try and affect or like change anything to Fred's point, whereby you're just like, you're here. That's enough. We allowed you to be in here. But to echo something that my friend has said, Simone Stewart, who's not here, but has said multiple times, it makes no sense in, if you think about it, when you're inviting someone over to your house, do you invite them over to your messy house? No, you clean your house. You figure that out. You ensure that the environment is healthy and good for them to come into that space, right? So definitely you bring up an important point that I feel like a lot of these movements seem to lose, or organizations seem to actually not really hone in on the fact that just recruiting Black folks and being like, okay, yeah, here you have a space here, without actually like making it a space where they can thrive is inherently violent and is not affecting any kind of change. But yeah, thank you so much for your perspective, Jeremy. It was incredibly powerful. One question that I did want to ask to you all is, what do you feel are, or some of the most pressing environmental issues that you feel like the Black community is facing today?
In my universe, this trading thing, these market solutions, they're horrific because they really don't take into account that Black and brown communities have very little to actually trade. We'll get all the trades, but no credits, basically. And it's a ripoff. And I wish I could get more people excited about challenging this, because it's also unseemly. These are public trust resources. How in the world are you going to convey a property interest or you know, a monetary interest in these resources? So that's the camel's nose under the tent. More people need to pay attention to it because it's a coming thing. The truth is, these fundraising oriented movements don't really have the means nor the plan that would save the planet, or for that matter, even the Chesapeake Bay. It's a really rotten plan. If you ever looked at it, it's called the Blueprint for the Bay. It's got no deadlines, no attainments, and if they don't make it, they'll just sign another agreement. That's literally the culture. So my point is, these movements aren't succeeding all the time. They're often enough they're failing. They need a new brain trust, and they need the passion and the struggle consciousness that comes with people born out of struggle, right? These civil rights movements and women's rights movements and human rights movements have that kind of juice. Nature-loving movements, you know, as Jerry pointed out, these are new professions. Earth Day wasn't that long ago. On Earth Day, I don't think there's anybody had a full-time job in the private sector protecting the environment. We used to laugh about it back then. I'm old enough to remember. You had to have a spouse with a job and benefits if you wanted to be a full-time environmentalist. Now we've got this new professional culture of insider environmentalists that has been created. All right, and for us to get access to that, we're going to be very, very proactive because it will not happen naturally. And like I said, the values are twisted sometimes. Monetary or market solutions aren't really solutions. They're just extending the same capitalism that wrecked these resources in the first place. And Black folks need to pay attention because we're going to get those trades. We're the ones who are going to get the toxic dumps and the, you know, the brown fields instead of green fields. Now, I don't want to overtalk it, but this is huge on a bigger scale. There are lots of little issues, smaller issues we can work on. But to me, that is one of the biggest ones. It's cutting us out of the equation for self-determining the future of our resources by essentially contracting them away or, you know, conveying them in some way or creating policies that put us at a huge disadvantage in terms of our ability to actually, you know, to assert control over our resources.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Fred. Definitely, you bring up an excellent point about who the environmental future is designed for. a lot of the time. And it seems like a lot of the time, especially as you're talking about specifically pollution trading, we're not part of that equation. And that's incredibly disappointing. Thank you so much for raising awareness to that. Imari, how do you feel, what do you feel is the most pressing environmental issues? Could be multiple.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo Fred. I'm thinking a lot about that brown field. Water quality, I think, is always going to be a very pressing issue for us, along with chemicals that are in almost every product that we use. The fact that federal regulation for most of our products hasn't changed in decades. We haven't updated, and we've added, hundreds of thousands of different chemicals into commerce. And just the fact that we're relying on companies to do their own toxicology reports to tell us that it's safe, when we should actually have that knowledge from multiple people saying that that's safe, is a problem. It's one of the reasons why, in the past few years, we stopped using sulfates, is because we realized, a few decades later, we shouldn't have it. But we can't just keep doing it on a case-by-case basis, because we're interacting with so many different chemicals, even within our own indoor environment. If you think about microplastics, if you're worried about drinking it in your water, you should be worried about breathing it in your air, in your home. It's 10 times stronger concentrations in your indoor environment, coming from your carpets, coming from your polyester clothing. And we don't know what that means. We don't know what that does. We know that all of these other chemicals are likely to absorb or attach to these microplastics, and they can work their way inside the body. So I think that chemical regulation and understanding what we're interacting with goes far beyond even just water quality, but it is going to be a pending issue. It's just a question of, is it cancer in 20, 30 years that we have to deal with later, or regulation now?
Thank you so much for sharing that, Imari. Definitely agree. Derick, what do you feel is like some of the most pressing environmental issues that are facing Black communities today?
So my answer is not going to be any science, because like my view of it is a little bit different than everyone else's, and there's a bunch of different answers to this. But when you pose that question, for me, it stuck out like, as a Black in a Black community, would be fear and not being aware of the environment and the outdoors, having the fear that it is a white thing. It's like the environment is only for, the outdoors is only for and I keep saying, because again, the outdoors to me is just doing a long hike or, camping. So this is the world I'm part of. And when you ask that question, for me is my family, my friends, a lot of the Black community is their fear of the outdoors, because that's how we grew up. And I know growing up, what happens in the woods, bad things happen. If you think of, our history, the Underground Railroad, we're in the woods running, like that's what we think of. And then you think of what happened, to us in the woods. What do they do to Black people in the woods when they're running in the woods? And also, not too far in history, the movies, you got all these, you got Jason chasing you with a machete, like you go to these cabins and this bad things happen, and Black person, the first person to die in these movies. So our fear is bad things happen. My brother was telling me when I told him I was going to hike the Appalachian Trails, like, get a machete, strap it to your chest. They come in small sizes, you're good to go. Protect yourself, because there's rednecks in the woods. So my answer for that would have been totally different from the one you guys are talking about, but is that we need to be more aware of it as a Black community. We need more people like us telling these stories. We need more books like mine. We need more Black people sharing our stories and our experience. So then they're like, oh, wow, okay. We do this. It's cool to be out there. That's my answer to this. I know it may sound simple, but if you think about it, it's pretty heavy and it's huge.
Absolutely. It's definitely complex, mending this deliberate disconnection, this historical disconnection that has happened, right? Thank you so much for bringing that up, Derick. Rachel, what do you feel is the most pressing environmental issue that's facing the Black community today?
I think all of these answers are intersecting, really. And my original answer to this question was, of course, climate change. But it's really about the cascading effects of what's going to happen when climate, or as climate is changing currently. And it is about that lack of awareness due to historical factors in the Black community, lack of awareness of the environment in some communities, because that's not in all communities. But it's also it's that combined with increased frequency of storms. And that's what I study, storms and rivers, increased frequency of flooding. So I'm starting a new project in Chicago, and people's basements in Chicago flood multiple times a year on the south side of Chicago, mostly on the south side of Chicago, where Black people live. And this is going to increase in frequency over the next just probably 2 years. I wouldn't even give it 5 years. So it's this I think climate change is going to eat away at basic aspects of life, your shelter, your home, your ability to get to work, to earn income. And that combined with lack of awareness, that combined with microplastics poisoning us, and then you have your flooding of your home, and then you got to go to the doctor and you don't have health insurance. You got to go to the doctor because you're being poisoned and you don't know what it is because we're not studying it enough. There are all of these interacting effects that are really going to tear into the Black community if we don't start to rely on it. Well, I think we're already doing it. I'm not going to downplay any of the work that Black people are doing in the community across the US, but I think, we need to all be on the same page and we need to act quickly.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rachel. Jeremy?
I think I'd also say water, right? In particular, drinking water, right? For me, water is life, right? And Black communities are, disproportionately impacted by water injustices and inequities as it relates to contamination in drinking water. So as I mentioned, I work primarily on drinking water, and in particular, Safe Drinking Water Act enforcement issues, which is, Safe Drinking Water Act is a law that governs, pollution in drinking water. And what we found throughout my work is of all the factors studied as it relates to drinking water contamination, race was the strongest factor in relationship to slow or inadequate enforcement of drinking water violations. And then from there, we found that drinking water systems that serve Black populations tend to spend more time out of compliance and in violation even after they've been cited by a regulator, right? So you can have a regulator say, hey, you're out of compliance, we're going to penalize you. And yet that water system in Black communities still will not fix that problem in a timely manner. We also realize that when problems were identified and enforcement actions were taken, problems not only remain uncorrected, but Black communities tend to face more violations for more contaminants, different contaminants as well. And I think when we think about that, right, it's this has happened all over the country too, right? This isn't kind of isolated incidents, but throughout the country where race is a direct indicator of drinking water contamination, disproportionately impacting Black communities. So for me, considering that water is life, water is a human right, we can't survive without it. I think that's one of the most important issues that Black communities in particular face: access to clean water.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
That was for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, just to add on to the drinking water context, that we're usually only regulating municipal city water services. We don't regulate well water services, and that's usually coming from communities of color and low-income communities. So we don't even monitor. We don't know what people who are drinking well water are exposed to, and that's another project that I do aside from microplastics. But that was studying a community of color in North Carolina, showing that their septic tanks were infiltrating their well water, and along with other things like their stormwater runoff being present with herbicides, pharmaceuticals, you name it. So it is a huge issue that we need to start talking about and start including well water in our regulation and in testing.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Imari. And definitely, I'm glad that you're highlighting the awesome work that you do on that as well. The next question that I have for you all is like, how can we ensure that the environmental space is an accessible space for all Black people? I know we've historically been in this space, but how do we make it an accessible framework for all Black people? How do we ensure that the environmental future really does include us in it? So this could be from calling people in, starting our own different like avenues and movements. I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on what you felt regarding that.
Actually, I do think conversations like these, as well as, I've been a co-organizer of the Taking Nature Black conferences for the last 4 years, and exponentially every year we expect X number of people and 3 times that many sign up for this thing. I actually do think, and you mentioned Black Twitter earlier, I do think our throat clearing around our own power on these issues is hugely important. We got to get our own stuff together. And then I think we can chip away at this mountain, because it does require changing how people view us, because there's a perspective problem. I think what we see isn't what they see. One of the most interesting things I've read lately, I read Randall Robinson's book, which is hard to find. I don't know if it's still in print, called Quitting America. And in it, he says that white people in America lack the gift of self-knowledge. And that hit me profoundly, because I do think we can help with that. I do think we have a perspective as people of color. We've been here for a while, and people don't notice us. We're like flies on the wall sometimes, and we know a lot, and we see a lot. Our truths are important for these organizations and these operatives to understand, but we need to keep chipping away at that mountain. It's as simple as that. It's not going to happen overnight. It surely will not happen through a diversity initiative, which largely seem to be white people talking to each other about what we want and need for the most part. So I think we have to keep working on it. I don't know a better way. And have our own conferences, actually. What's really funny? No one's ever asked us why so many Black people show up for the Taking Nature Black conference. I'll tell you why. Because they're soulful events where we get to talk about solutions, not just issues. You can go to an environmental conference, talk about stormwater for 2 days and never get around to talking about a specific thing. Every conference workshop is expressed around solving a particular problem for a particular community. But there's also poetry, drumming, singing, praying, drumming. It's got everything you'd find in the Black community. And what's funny is none of the white folks have come to me saying, well, how do we get these folks in our, but this is how you do it. You have a conference and you have a movement like this one. And that's what's really funny. They keep trying to figure out how to get control of it, but don't take the breadcrumbs that these are the soulful movements that Black people create. That's what I think is real. And I had to learn that through environmentalism. I didn't know that when I came to this work. I had to figure it out along the way.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Derick.
I want to add to what Fred said. So yeah, doing panels like this. And also my big thing is letting people know, not just the Black community, but all communities know that we're not saying, hey, here's the outdoors, Black people can do it too. What we're saying is we've been doing it. We didn't just start doing this. We've been doing this for a while. I wasn't the first Black person to hike the Appalachian Trail. So my thing is to let others know that, hey, we've been doing this for a long time. And the Black community know that, hey, look, here's a face, and we're doing something that you think is only white people or other people do. We've been doing this for a while, and you can join us in these conversations. So continuing doing stuff like this, but also make a point that, hey, we're not saying, again, I'm going to repeat myself, but we're not saying we're bringing the outdoors, showing the outdoors to Black people. We're saying, no, we're doing this, and we're going to feature the people that want to speak up and talk about it. They're doing it, and you can do it too. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you for sharing that, Derick. You're very right. We've been here. We're going to be here. We're going to keep being here, right? Rachel?
Yeah, I just want to echo that it's a perspective problem. Like Fred said, when I started doing my work around environmental justice and asking questions about who cares about the environment, I found all of these old papers saying that white people care more about the environment than Black people. And we measured it. Like, we've done statistical tests to show this. And I started to think, well, that doesn't seem right. So I started to do my own research and like actually collect data to show that that is not the case. And lots of other people have collected data to show that Black people and other people of color care more about the environment than white people. And lots of people have shown it. So I think it's about how other people view us, and that limits our opportunities to be involved in environmentalism. But in terms of what we can do, I think we can listen to the communities that we live in. I think that's the most important part. Black people haven't been heard enough on environmental issues, especially the ones impacting their own communities. So I think we need to canvass. We need to knock on people's doors and ask them, you know, what issues are you concerned about and what do you want to work on tomorrow with me? And what I've realized, I do a lot of like mentoring and tutoring of high school students, and sometimes I do workshops on environmental justice. And I do workshops, I start a workshop on like Warren County, which was known as the birthplace of the environmental justice movement. And when I tell these students about Warren County, you know, they're not knowledgeable about the situation, but they identify with how the people of Warren County felt. And they start to connect to their local environment. Like, oh, okay, well, am I experiencing a cough because I live next to that polluting industry? Like, people are already making the connections, and people already have the ability to become environmentalists or grow their environmentalism. I think we just need to give them a space to talk about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. Imari?
Yeah, I think I'd agree a lot with Rachel as well. And I think that this question kind of coincides also with the question from the chat of like, how do you share with your friends and family being environmentalists, and, you know, making this space more accessible for our community itself. You know, I think it's an interesting question, because I think when I started my PhD 5 years ago, told people I was studying plastic, I think nobody in my family really cared. I think eventually, a few years in, I started getting more active about, you know, the idea of what this meant to my own life and in livelihood. And so I started talking more about it. And I think the initial reactions was, oh no, they're trying to take my water bottles. She's trying to take my Solo cups. But it's not that. It's really showing people that you can do these things and it's totally fine. And I think creating the YouTube channel and trying to make this information more accessible was when things started to change, when people started to realize, oh, okay, I should be worried about this. Oh, can I send you this, you know, this container? Do you think it has this X, Y, and Z, you know, should I be worried about that? So I think that we can do it. It just, you know, it takes a little bit of persistence and time to kind of break down why these issues may be important, or why we should be more engaged with, you know, being outdoors and hiking. It's just, you know, bringing it to their level, making it more accessible, thinking about ways to make things funny sometimes too makes a difference. I think the way that I was actually able to get more of like my grandma on board was because I made her laugh in my videos, because I was taking on different characters. So I think that's how she actually started to get some of that knowledge about, okay, maybe I should start recycling or thinking about what products I'm using. So it's being accessible. It's, you know, getting on TikTok, getting on, you know, YouTube, getting on, you know, Twitter, being there, be present, and making it, you know, something that people can be a part of. But yeah, sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes I get laughed at for the things I'm trying to do. But I think if you stay persistent and you keep talking about it in the family chats, in the cookouts, you know, with your friends, let's go mend some clothes together. Like, I've never done that before, but like, let's do it. You know, you can make small steps. People will start doing their own systems of change and changing people around them as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Imari. Jeremy?
Yeah, I think two ways in particular come to mind when I think about engaging, more Black people in the environmental space. One is that, like, we're already doing it, and we've been doing it, right? We've been doing it for centuries, right? Black people have been, great shepherds and stewards of this land for centuries, right? Without having to put a name to it, right? Without having to define it. So I think if we can better communicate, like, you're already doing it, right? That, like, that garden right in your backyard, that's part of the rain barrels you got outside collecting water, right? Like that's part of it. You may not have a name for it, but I think if we can figure out a way to communicate, hey, you're already an environmentalist, right? And if we don't need to call it that, fine. Like, that's fine too. We call it whatever we want to call it. But to get them engaged in that work in a meaningful way, I think requires us to say, hey, you are a significant part of this work that's already taken place at a micro and macro level. And how can we pull them into it in a more formal way? I think it's part of that. I think the other part too is, again, goes back to accessibility, like making sure that the opportunities that we create for people to engage are literally accessible, right? Like, and I think COVID, which I thought would kind of throw my work off, it's actually expanded my work, because I can create spaces for people who otherwise don't have the time to engage, right? Because they don't have the transportation to get there, because they don't have somebody to watch their kids, because they have to work the second or third shift. They can't be available for the meetings during business hours or even after hours, right? So I think creating opportunities that that they can engage in literally, right? That they can take the time to engage in. So essentially, meeting people where they are, meeting our people where they are, so that they can be a part of that work is critical.
Awesome, thank
I
you
just want to
all.
interject a quick anecdote, if I may.
Yep, yeah, sure thing, Fred.
So it's been instructive to see how people of color have seen this job over the years. I had a cousin I ran into recently who asked me what I was doing. I hadn't seen him for a while. He said, "Oh, this is more of you just being a hippie like you were when you were a kid," which kind of cracked me up. But more importantly, when we first opened Riverkeeper, the FedEx guy eventually asked, because he'd been dropping packages by the office, "What in the world do you people do here?" And I explained it, watershed protection, watchdog agency, that sort of thing. He said, "Dag, I didn't think white folks let us do that. You could have knocked me over with a stick." I mean, I think there's a story there, right? If we normalize this, because I've asked myself that once, like, okay, I went to the speech by the Black woman who climbed Mount Everest, and I thought, well, why is this special? And I realize now, because we're normalizing stuff that isn't normal, right? We're a rarity right now in these cause movements, and so people think that that's the way things are. The truth is, there are lots of us out here, as we've all observed, and we have to get people used to that idea. So the more we normalize this stuff, the more people get the idea that this is not something we're doing to emulate white people necessarily. We're being ourselves. That's the whole point. I can't imagine a movement or a place other than the environment where you could be more yourself. This is a self-actualizing product we're offering, the best news in the world, the environment, right? And these other movements sometimes have sucked the life out of it, sometimes by preoccupying themselves with the science and the procedure and their careers and all these other things they bring to the table. But for us, it's always been pretty organic. I grew up on a farm. I don't have any deficit of environmental connection by any stretch of the imagination. Yet I must endure constant explanations from people who are not people of color, who think I need to be educated on this stuff, that I don't have education to share in return. So I'll shut up there. You can tell I can go on just by nature, but these are ideas. It's a rare forum. To be fair, this is a rare forum. Let me put it that way. It's rare that I get an opportunity to talk when the panel is primarily people of color. That's rare. We need more of that.
Absolutely. And we welcome it. This is a forum for us to take as much space as we want to celebrate and uplift each other in our efforts. And yeah, thank you all so much for your dynamic answers. It's been really powerful. We don't have a lot of time for Q&A, so I'll only ask some of the few questions, but for those attending, do know that we're going to share your questions with the panelists after. Thank you so much for this. So the one question that we want to pose to you all is from Liz Klein, who asks, I wonder if any of the panelists have specific advice with helping teenagers get more excited about the outdoors, especially students of color who may not see familiar faces in the environmental science world. Open to anyone.
So I do this work, and maybe it helps that I'm Black and I'm helping Black kids. So they're just like, oh, you're doing it? That looks kind of cool. Maybe I'll do it too. So I don't really have a problem bringing them into, outdoor spaces. And oftentimes I work with students in the housing authority. So they always want to get away. They always want to get away from the house. They want to get away from the neighborhood. So we take them out to like the wetlands in the neighborhood. We take them out to the rivers. So yeah, I think my advice is you have to be relatable. For me, that's what's helped, relating to them. And I guess letting them know that this is a space that they can be safe. I think that's another barrier, even for myself, going out into the outdoors, especially like doing field work or anything by myself. Sometimes I don't feel safe. And I think that can be a huge barrier. Like, well, I don't know if y'all saw the Atlanta episode, the show, what is his name? I think some people may get the reference, but this big Black guy goes out into the woods and he is just having the worst day of his life, like scared from the bird sounds, scared from like a squirrel crawling, like, yes, that's probably a lot of our experiences our first time in the environment. So you have to make it feel safe and don't just throw them into the middle of a dense forest or something. Make sure there's a path. Make sure it's accessible. That's a big thing too. For a lot of people, trails aren't accessible and they can't actually make it through, either due to various reasons. So yeah, that's my advice on that part.
Derick?
Yes, I agree on all those things. I do a lot of talks, like I mentioned earlier, with schools, and the kids, when they see me and I share my story, because I do share that. It's funny you mentioned squirrels in the woods. I talk about how, like, when I first hiked by myself, squirrels running on dry leaves sounded like a stampede of boars. And I was like, oh, and then I look in the woods and then I would see like stuff in the wood, like dragons and like something that was going to attack me. And then I'm like, I wish I had that machete I can strap to my chest so I could feel a lot more safe. So that's the thing, is that when I tell them my story and I'm like, oh, it's okay, like I came out of this okay, then the kids are like, wow, and that's where all the questions come. So for me, and I've been doing this for a while now, and I make sure on my social media, especially on Instagram, I make sure that I let people know that, hey, I just did a talk at a school, at a middle school, because I want more people to know that that's what I do. This is what I do. It's not about the money. It's about me sharing the outdoors and having more kids more aware of what's going out and what's out there for them. So every single time I do these talks, I know I'm walking into this where the kids are like, okay, what's this dude going to talk about? And I make sure to catch them, like Imari said, with humor. And I make sure that I try to be funny. And if they're not laughing, I'm going to keep going until, even if I have to go up to them and start tickling them, I make sure that they at least, because I'm telling them a story, in order to tell them a story, and I normally do a presentation also because these are kids, and they got squirrely brains, and they're like, so if they have something to look at, and I make it entertaining for them. And then I had this girl tell me, I don't know if I mentioned it here, but I remember telling someone this, that after my talk, they were like, hey, I'm sorry for the 7th graders, because we thought you were going to be boring. And they walked into it like, oh, here's a guy talking about the outdoors. And when they came out of there, like, I want to read your book, or I want to go in the outdoors. I can't tell you how many messages I got this week from teenagers saying that you made the outdoors fun. Thank you so much. And I went to this white school real quick. I went to this white school. There was 3 kids. I'm sorry, there wasn't 3 kids in this. There was 3 Black kids in the entire school. Okay. And the 3 were at my talk. And I love Q&As. And 2 of the Black kids asked me a question. The first question was, how long is your hair? And I'm like, come on, man, is that what you got out of my, come on. But the other kid came up to me, he's like, wow, this is great. Like, I never thought of the outdoors this way. And he reached out to me afterwards, like sent me a message, because I always tell them, hey, follow me on Instagram. I always have a lot of stories beyond the book on my website, and I'm constantly doing adventures. So they need to see me constantly doing this. So when they see this dude that has a lot of energy, a lot of passion for the outdoors, then they're like, okay, I can't. And also parents coming up to me and saying, hey, my kids just came from school excited about this dude that talked about the outdoors. I love that. I love that. If only one kid said that, it'd be great, but all these kids are doing it, so I know I'm doing something right. So yes, to all this, I love it.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Derick and Rachel. You clearly have both made it clear that accessibility, both in just generally in how you convey this work, is such an important part to get people to interested in the work, you know, inspired, determined to move forward with it. So lastly, I'm going to ask you all to participate in a one-word checkout. This is something we like to do in the Black and Environment space. If you could describe in one word how you feel after this conversation, what would it be?
Full.
Connected.
United.
Hopeful. Hopeful.
Inspired.
Thank you all so much. And
That was going to be my word, but you, I left it for you.
Thank you all so much for being here today, for being part of this conversation. I truly feel seen is the word that I would like to use today, because you are such dynamic and wonderful individuals, and we're so thankful that you're taking up space and doing the work that you do for our healthy Black environmental futures. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who attended. I wish you all well. Just as a heads up, we have more events that are coming up. Tomorrow we have a really great conversation on our Instagram Live, and we also have a cooking demo with Veggies with Asia. And then on Friday, we have a really awesome Black future focused panel that's happening. So please do check those out. They're free, register for them. And thank you all for just being here. This has been such a phenomenal evening. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Timney. You're an awesome moderator. You did a great job.
You're great. Yes.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.